Living Life Juicy podcast. Conversations with interesting people you should know. Welcome to the Living Life Juicy podcast, where we explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things. I'm your host and guide, John Losey. And if you're interested in video resources and insights on how people grow and how groups develop, you can go to the Growing People podcast YouTube channel and blog, and you can find video resources and other things there. This is all part of the Into Wisdom group. If you go to intowisdomgroup.com, you can learn more about it. Coming soon, I have a passion for professional development, especially for underserviced populations and communities like educators and facilitators and trainers, which they're great professionals, but there's not a big budget for professional development in those worlds. So I've been asked to start a Patreon so that I can continue to follow my quest for making professional development and coaching available to all. Now, this is a podcast, so please like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast so that other people can meet the interesting people that I interview and talk with. Today, I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Amy Climer here to talk about her work and what she does. She's a creator, she's a speaker, she's an innovator. She works with groups, and she also puts out products like Climer cards. She speaks on topics like creativity, innovation, and team development. And she does a lot of work in the realm of creativity in team context. So I'm excited about that. We got to know each other virtually over the past few years about how to figure out how to do this kind of facilitation virtually. We met for the first time in person at the AEE International Conference in 2022. I'm really grateful for this connection, but I'll let Amy tell more about herself. So welcome, Amy. Glad that you're here.
Thank you, John. It's so good to be here.
So let me kick this off, because if you're like me and people ask, what do you do? Sometimes there's difficulty explaining it. So when somebody asks you what you do, what do you say?
I tell them that I teach teams and organizations how to be more innovative. So I have a consulting practice, and the way that work shows up, sometimes it's keynote speaking. Most often it's through training and coaching and some consulting work in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now switch a little bit. What does your wife say that you do? When they're asked, hey, what does Amy do? What does she say?
She probably says something similar. Yeah, actually,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know my wife struggles because she actually has worked with me in the past, and she goes, well, here's, and she does her best at it. But tell me a little bit more about how you got. I love to explore origin stories, because I don't know about you. I've been asked many times, how did you get to where you're at? How did you do what you do? I'd love to hear your journey to becoming the Amy Climer that we get today.
Sounds great. How far back do you want me to go?
If you want to, I started off as a child, you can, but I'll let you make the choice on what's relevant.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll share maybe a couple little vignettes from childhood. I do give my mom some credit here. She, I think, did a great job with my sister and brother and I of helping foster sort of this sense of, curiosity through arts and crafts. And so when we were real little, I remember in the kitchen, like the lower level cabinet, she had this cabinet that was just stuffed with art supplies. So, construction paper, glue, paint, crayons, whatever we wanted to do. And we could just pull the stuff out and sit on the kitchen floor and, draw and paint or whatever. And then, of course, as we got older, those supplies got more sophisticated. And in middle school, when I was in middle school, I was the oldest, so they were a little younger, but she hired this elementary school art teacher that would come to our house after school on Wednesdays, which was like the early release day. And she would make art with us for 2 hours, like whatever we wanted to do. And it was really fun. We loved it. That went on for a couple of years. And one day, her name was Sue, the teacher. So one day, Sue's there, and my older cousin Mark was there with us. And we were like painting, like doing these abstract paintings. And he started asking Sue all these questions about creativity and intelligence. And it was like I had always been interested in creativity, but I'm in middle school, maybe early high school, like it was still a very nebulous thing. And it's when I started recognizing this is like a concept that could be explored and maybe there's like questions around it. And it was the first time I'd probably had an intelligent conversation with adults around the concept of creativity. And I loved it. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I was the person that would always get so mad at my friends when they would say, oh, I'm not creative. And I'm like, what? Yes, you are. Creativity is not about drawing. It doesn't matter if
Yeah.
you can draw, and I'd go on some sort of diatribe with them,
Tell
which
me in middle school you didn't get into the research that we're all creative.
no, not yet. That was, although honestly, if we had YouTube back then, I might have. Oh, no, that didn't come until much later. Probably in my 20s is when I really started to dig into like how, looking beyond art, looking at creativity really beyond art. And there was one particular day, which I talk about this in my TEDx talk, where I was at a team meeting, and this is an experience that I'm sure you've had, John. I think probably most listeners have had. Where I was in a team meeting, and one of my colleagues was struggling with something, and so she wanted some help coming up with some ideas, and asked us if we could join her in a brainstorming session. And we're like, yeah, of course. And so, I mean, I was sort of like half paying attention until she said brainstorming, and then I was super excited. And as the ideas started flowing about the fourth idea, this other colleague who I refer to as Phil, so Phil says, oh no, we can't do that. We did that in 1985 and it was a complete disaster. I just bust out laughing. I was like, oh my God, that's so funny. And then I realized he was not joking. He was dead serious. And I was like, 1985, I was a child. Um, anyway, and
Yeah.
that experience and many like it made me curious of like, why did that happen? And so anyway,
Yeah.
spent the
So,
next couple decades
yeah.
exploring that.
What did you study as an undergrad?
I studied biology.
Me too.
You too?
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason, and actually, like I thought, okay, I'm going to be a teacher and a coach, so I'll teach biology and coach football and wrestling. Well, guess what? I'm a teacher and coach, and my biology still serves me because it was all about learning about systems.
Mm,
And I wasn't these people who would memorize all the different stuff. I'd learn the system and then fill in the blanks depending on where I went. So it
yeah.
turned into a really helpful for what I do right now, which is organizational. I call it organizational ecologist because I'm more of a systems guy. But when you
Yeah.
look at organizational development and even coaching, and you understand the systems approach to it, man, it brings everything to life.
That's so interesting. Because I also think too about systems, but I hadn't made that connection to undergrad biology, maybe in part because I had one 6-month job in anything related to biology, and then that was it.
Yeah, so I went out after I was done. One of the things that I did, I was a cross between Jacques Cousteau and Mr. Fun on a boat that did like camps and also research stuff.
Oh, what
So
was it called?
it was called the Rapture,
Oh,
and we went out of Catalina, and then I helped them open up Hawaii. So I spent a lot of time about 30 yards off the coast of Hawaii and in the water, but it
nice.
was yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I was a naturalist, and I did some field stuff. So all my stuff was more like being a camp counselor than a field
Hmm.
biologist, although I played that role.
That's
And
awesome.
it was a blast. It was so much fun. But I never thought, like, after I realized I got hired as a teacher at a private school, and then about 2 weeks before the school was supposed to start, they said, "Oh, sorry, the guy that you're replacing decided to come back, so you don't have a job." Okay,
Oh,
so that's how
that's
I
awkward.
accidentally got a master's degree because I didn't know what else to do at that point.
Yeah, there you go.
So biology, and then did you go straight into a PhD, or did you get your master's, or tell me about that? What got you into, your advanced degree work?
Yeah, so when I finished my biology degree, I thought I was going to go be a biologist. Was really interested in ecology, environmental science, marine biology, and I
You
had
wanted
a
to work with dolphins, right?
you bet I did.
I got a chance to work with the Dolphin Research Center on Hawaii.
Oh, that's cool.
And not that we get to play with the dolphins, but I got there and I got to see the research. It was really cool.
Yeah.
But go ahead. You were
Well,
gonna you're gonna work with dolphin, but
Well, I grew up in Orlando, and so I went to SeaWorld many, I mean, just countless times. I don't
Mhm.
know. Anyway, so I had this job with the U.S. Forest Service for it was just a 6 month seasonal position in Washington State, and realized like I don't know that this is really what I want to do.
Were you researching slugs?
No, I was a stream surveyor. Yeah, so basically we walked up
Yeah.
streams all day and took measurements and stuff. And the job itself was fine for a seasonal position. I didn't really hate the job, but when I saw what the other people were doing, I couldn't really see myself in it. And in hindsight, I didn't really understand what I was seeing, and I probably would have enjoyed it. But anyway, during college, I also was very involved in leading outdoor programs. We had a really strong program that was actually accredited by the Association for Experiential Ed, which how we met. Um, and so I really missed it. I missed facilitating and leading trips. And so I spent about 2 years doing that, in mostly in, Colorado and out west. And then was kind of bumping up against like the jobs that I was trying to get, I couldn't get without a higher degree. So I actually went and got a master's degree at University of New Hampshire in outdoor education. And so did that. And then after that, I ended up moving to University of Wisconsin, which is where I had that experience with the brainstorming thing. But it was in there in those couple of years at UNH and slightly before where I started to like just read up more about creativity and understand it. And I wanted to actually do my thesis on creativity, and my thesis advisor in the outdoor ed program was like, yeah, no. It's
I
like,
hate thesis advisors. I
oh,
love
he's a
them
great
as
guy.
people, but when they this is what I found in higher education, the deeper you go into a topic, the narrower your perspective has to be. So when somebody comes at it from a different angle, it's they're wonderful people, but they get threatened when you bring something outside their purview.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if he was threatened, but maybe a little bit. I mean, I think it was a topic that he didn't know a whole lot about, so he knew he wouldn't be able to help much.
Right.
Yeah, you probably know him. He's still in the field. Do you know Michael Gass?
Yes. Well, I
Yeah,
don't know him, know
you
of
know
him.
of him. Yes,
He's
yeah.
just written a couple of core books in the
Yeah,
field.
right. Yeah, so from there I ended up at University of New Hampshire. I was the assistant outdoor program director. And then after about 3 years in that role, I ended up moving across campus to the business school, and I started a leadership program for undergraduates at the school. And honestly, I eventually got bored with the job and I left. And there's some other jobs in there, but eventually in 2009, I opened my consulting practice.
Yeah.
And in 2011 is when I started my PhD. And I finished a few years ago, but um, yeah.
Yeah. It's not a lot of, I mean, I think knowing people in the facilitation world, especially experiential and adventure, a lot of people conflate those two things. Um, I think you see a lot, and I'm intrigued by creativity, and I'll tell you my own journey in that perhaps later. But this idea is you watch people struggle to deal with a obstacle that's put in front of them, a
Mhm.
challenge or whatever
Mhm.
exercise it is, and you get a feel for where exercise and creativity can come into play positively and negatively when people are going through these experiences that you're designing for them. So I totally get how you could be intrigued by that and experience. The more I do facilitation, the more intrigued I am about how groups get to where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, um, tell me about Mike specifically. What about the PhD program sucked you in about creativity?
Mm. So at that point, I was a couple years into my consulting practice, and I there was a number of factors playing. One was I was getting a little bored intellectually, and I just wanted like more of an intellectual push. And I knew that I wanted to dig in more into creativity. I was doing some of the work at that time was around helping teams be more creative, but more of the work was about just general team development and leadership development. And so I wanted to go to a university that I could like, had the freedom to dig into creativity. I didn't want to have the same experience I had before. And so I did. I ended up at Antioch University. And another one of my criteria is I wanted a school that was actually being creative. I
Mhm.
didn't want to go and work with professors or with a department that I felt like was stagnant or outdated or
Yeah.
Antioch was an amazing experience. It was a really, I think it was a top-notch program. It was a great fit for me. And I was able to dig into all that creativity research. And then that kind of in turn was, helped my consulting practice. It helped me, it gave me just more background, more skills, more knowledge to guide the teams that I've been working with. And one of the big findings, I shouldn't say findings, one of the things that I learned from just the readings and everything I did is how creativity is something that can be taught. It can be learned. And what I've noticed, and I was just talking about this earlier today with a mentor, that we have this really high expectation, and as with other professionals, like say I'm a part of a company, my expectation is that we will be creative together, we will innovate, but no one ever teaches anything about how to be creative.
Yeah.
And so we expect this, but we've done nothing to even explain any of it. And that's where I often come in, is like, okay, we need some help with being creative.
I
Help
want
us
to
out.
jump into that more of that later, but I want to ask you, what's the difference between creativity and innovation, or is there?
Good question. So this is a topic of a lot of debate and conversation, and the answer is different depending on which field you're in. So in the creativity research, there's really not any difference. However, if you look at some of the business and management research, they do separate it out. I tend to align more with like the pure creativity researchers. So the definition of creativity is novelty that is valuable. So that's it. It's basically about just solving problems in new ways, that kind of thing. What I think we often do is we use the word creative when we're talking about artists, writers, anything like in the kind of humanities fields. But then we use the word innovative when we're talking about things in science, business, entrepreneurship. And one way I make the distinction is that innovation is creativity with economic gain. So if it's something that involves money, we're going to probably call it innovative. If it's something less about money and other types of value, we probably call it creative.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I was asked, so I was working at a large corporate university, and of course, somebody comes up with, hey, we need to be more innovative. And they say, okay, John, we want you to research and do a white paper on innovation. And really what they're interested in is this, what is creativity versus innovation, and coming from a business. So that's what was framed up. And I looked at the stuff that was being done at Pepperdine and Stanford and some other places. And ultimately what it came down to, the way that in my research, it came down to, like, creativity is kind of what you said, is basically combining things in new ways, looking at things in new ways, whether it's valuable or not, to people outside of you. You find value in your own creativity, which allows artists to really pursue and find new things. Now, innovation, and that's, so creativity is an individual competency that can be developed. Research goes towards, we unlearn creativity through the education process.
We do.
Therefore, you can learn creativity and gain that competency. But then innovation in organizations is a cultural capacity. So innovation can happen. And I like what you said, basically, is creativity with an economic gain. It's where there's value to some sort of consumer, some sort of partner, whether it's the workforce or your customers or the industry. So that's where innovation becomes this cultural capacity for create the best ideas to rise to the top, the most valuable ideas to rise to the top. So I realized that was in a very specific context, but it's been very helpful for me when I'm working with organizations to clarify those things. And just for business people to say, no, there's a difference between innovation and creativity. You want to create a space where your people can be creative, and then create systems in your organization where the most valuable ideas rise to the top, and you don't judge the other ideas. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I don't fully agree with all of it, but it does make sense.
Good. Okay. Tell me about your disagreements. What?
Well, I like what you said about that it's like this cultural capacity. I think, is that the phrase you used?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with that, that there is this like cultural piece that if innovation or creativity is going to rise within the organization,
Yeah.
it does have to be something that, there's a culture created around it. Like this is something we care about. This is something we're going to support and elevate. I think that looking at creativity as an individual capacity is a bit limiting. And this is also where we get in a little bit into semantics between the two words. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really care what you call it.
Right.
But if you look at like the research on creativity over the last, well, pretty much most research on creativity started around 1950. There was a seminal moment, like a critical moment right there in the psychology research that sparked all this creativity research. Anyway, one of the most, I think, I guess you could look at it as like my research hero is Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He passed away a couple years ago, but he's most well known for the concept of discovering the concept of flow, of us being in a state of flow. And he discovered that through his research around creativity. He was also one of the founders of the field of positive psychology. But one of the things he came up with was he talked about like these different levels of creativity that we can have within us. I don't know. I know Daniel Cape was on your podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know if Daniel mentioned any of this, but there's this like little c and big C creativity. And so little c creativity is more of that like personal, like individual level creativity. Like what am I doing on the weekends? Like I got a woodworking studio in my garage, like that kind of creativity. It doesn't have to be art, but that's just an example.
Right.
Um, Big C creativity is where we are doing things that actually are impacting the entire field that we work in. Um, so there's no way that an individual does this alone. It is always with a team. And he did this really cool research where he looked at people who had been highly creative at that big C level from their whole career. And every single one of them, when he interviewed them, he was like, they said, oh no, I have a whole team that we do this together. They were getting the credit, but it wasn't just about them. Um, and and I do agree that like we need to develop these individual creativity skills, but a team can be creative together. A company can be creative together.
Yeah.
So it's not just an individual thing where we put, the sum of the parts equals, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm blundering that, but it's like this exponential explosion when we do get together, ideally anyway, and you have a team who's being creative together. That's gonna be much bigger and much greater than 10 individuals.
Right. And that's
So
where
anyway,
I mean, to me, when you're saying big C creativity, that to me is in the realm of innovation.
yes, I would agree
And
with you.
yeah.
And the point is, the research uses the word creativity.
Right.
So
You mean the creativity research uses the word
yeah,
creativity?
exactly.
Shocker. No, and that's where like one of the things I realized when working inside a large corporation, they love to bring in outsiders with education, with academics. Academic is not a compliment inside a corporate environment.
Hmm.
And so I had to come in because I'm like you and really curious, and I'll go research stuff overly so. And then I'll come and I'll talk to the VPs and they'll go, shut up, John. We don't care. Just give us the answer.
Right.
And what happens is, and I've got a whole article on this called It's Complicated. And the idea is that, so I'm sitting in I got a chance as a mid-level manager, leadership and organizational development. I'd sit in on the board meetings and like executive meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And VP would say, you know what? I want some information on this. And the directors are all sitting there. He says, can you get me something by next Friday? And they all run out. And there's most of them will come in the next day or 2 days and they'll say, here you go.
Mm.
And what they've done is they've offered the simplest answer, the first one that they came across.
Yeah.
Now, I worked with people who would be like, would I coach them? John Cleese has some great stuff about this of using all the time you have.
Yep.
So they would wait until they would keep on working and keep on going through the simplistic answer. They'd see that it's complicated. Most people go, oh, it's complicated. Don't want to go there. But they work through that until they see the complexity and the elegance of it, of the
Yeah, I love
problem.
it.
And then they go back down and they keep on working until that that elegance turns into a simple answer, not simplistic.
Mhm.
Then they present that, and we had some great VPs who would just, you come with an answer, they'll grill you until they know you truly understand the whole thing. And if you go through that whole complexity to complicated to complexity to simple, you can work back up that answer as far as they want to go. But you come in and you offer it as, oh no, it's almost like the country bumpkin lawyer who just says, hey, this is what it is.
Mhm.
And then people push them, they go, yeah, but, and then you can get into all the research and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that was my experience of like creativity and innovation in a corporate university.
Yeah.
I really appreciate talking to you and Daniel, who did a deep dive into the research. It's wonderful.
Well, and I love what you just said, that the phrase using all the time you have. And because I do think one of the things that's kind of happened, and I don't know if it's just recent or if it's always been this way, but we are in such a fast-paced world, and so most of us at times at least feel like we have too much to do and we're a bit overworked. And so when you go out and you do a 15-minute research online and you come back and you've got like, a Harvard Business Review article and maybe a Forbes article or something, you're like, oh, I figured it out. You're like, wow, you've got two perspectives. Hopefully they're from two different authors, but
Right.
that's like none of the things that we're doing are there only two perspectives on. And what would be really great is if you did enough research to find like, oh, those two perspectives actually are really great or really not. And so, yeah, I think that you're right. Like, digging in deeper is much more powerful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And
yeah.
people don't want to explore things that don't agree with their current perspective. And to
Yeah.
me, that is essential because people, and this goes into that great excuse for not going there is, oh, it's just too complicated. Let's go with the
Yeah.
first thing that comes across our plate. And if you haven't heard John Cleese talk about this, it's amazing what he talks about. First of all, he's hilarious, but he's also really a very gifted organizational development consultant. And talking about that idea of don't let it sit, use all the time you have. Don't give an answer until you have to. And that's what these directors were out there. Some just said, hey, first one wins.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who were using all that time went through that. They all came up with the same first answers for the most part because they all think the same way. The ones who are willing to explore the battle that confirmation bias,
Yeah.
what we think is happening. But look, all these groups did that and it sucked. It didn't work. We just thought that was the first answer. So I really is it to me getting people to slow down. I'm actually working with a current client right now that wants to just speed through. And I'm going, it's not about the product, it's the process. The process is what will gain alignment and all that other stuff.
And the process will lead to a better product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my thoughts around this came from outdoor stuff. And
Mhm.
I don't know, I worked with an outdoor program and we'd take like I had 99th grade girls in the desert with no running water, it was basically tent facilities. And we'd
Yep.
always have gold line cord that goes, I mean, that's the utility, it's like the duct tape of camping. And
Mm-hmm.
winding those things up is just a challenge. So we'd hand them out, and then kids would always come up to me and say, it's tangled. And some would say, like, it's tangled, and then yank on it to knot it up.
That's
Others would
worse.
cut out the tangle, and it's like, oh no. But what would happen is I'd have some in my pockets, and they'd come and say, this doesn't work. I'd hand it to them, the untangled one, and take that and work it out. And I learned to get an appreciation for knots. Sometimes it's just a turn in the rope. Other times it truly is a knot and you work it backward. And every once in a while, a kid would come up and watch me do it.
Mm.
And that's where, like, I'm teaching these kids, not realizing it's who knows when kids are watching, but they
Right.
walk away and go, okay, taking some time to look at the problem actually benefits me in the long run. So many years ago, as a dirty naturalist in Joshua Tree, informed a lot of my corporate interactions.
Yeah, I love it. I know I have
Yeah.
so many of those experiences as well. I used to work for Outward Bound. I still do actually. I just became a whitewater canoe instructor for them that I do kind of like once a month or so
Right.
during the season. And there's so many good learnings there from that type of outdoor work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask a couple more questions and then we'll get to a lightning round.
Okay.
But first thing I want to ask you, you shared a little bit that you've been working on a book for a while. You did a writing retreat. Tell me about the book and your process.
Sure.
I'm really curious about what you're going to put out there.
Yeah. So the book is for leaders who want their teams to be more creative or innovative, and they don't quite know where to start. And you mentioned systems earlier, and that's the premise of the book is that I teach a system on how to be more creative or innovative. And basically what I've noticed in my work from tiny to big companies is that almost nobody is using a system. There are some many, I mean, I shouldn't say almost nobody. There are many that are, but I would say that many is still a very small percentage. So I teach a system. It's very accessible, easy to understand. It's based on the creative problem solving process. Yeah, so that's the premise of the book.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. And then, so last few years, a lot of articles out there saying brainstorming doesn't work. Well, and they're right. The way that they describe brainstorming, it doesn't work. It's a friend of mine calls it creative arguing with snacks, and it doesn't work because uh, you're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will give up. And I've seen so many, whatever business book they read, they'll read the book, they'll try what the business person said one time and they'll do it in a vacuum and it won't work and they'll throw the book out, the whole process. And it's because they didn't go deep enough, take the time. And
Yeah.
so it's so crucial that there's some not, people think you can't be creative with parameters. That's against it. But there's a whole group of research about how parameters make you more creative. I
Exactly.
don't know if you've ever looked at Keith Jarrett and the experience he had with the Colm concert. You know that story?
Mm-mm. And not off the top
Okay,
of my head, no.
okay, Colm, Keith Jarrett, in '70s improv jazz, just one of the best improv jazz people, and he got hired to do a concert in Cologne, Germany. And he goes there. They have a small broken piano on stage that won't project. And he goes, I'm not going to do the concert here. And the promoter says, oh, please, I've got so many people coming and we got to do this. So he says, okay, we're going to record this and I'm going to show you just how bad it can be. Well, you listen to the Cone concert and it's brilliant because he can't play his normal like improv approach. So he has to pound on the keys, he's got to go different directions. That turned into the best-selling improv jazz album. I think maybe even still, but at least for a couple decades.
Wow, that's awesome.
And the thing is the constraints forced him to be more creative.
Yeah.
And that's informed a lot of what I do is that, when I'm leading a creative process, I'll create different activities that impose constraints so that people have to think differently about things.
Mhm.
So I got a lot of my creativity stuff from the guy who put together the creativity curriculum for Imagineers.
Nice.
And Craig McNair Wilson, got a shout out to him. He and I put together something for corporate that we put into my corporate university. But man, you're so true about people needing a process to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's not like this totally draconian rules, but there's something about having that familiar safety of knowing we're going someplace.
Yeah.
So, especially for the people who don't think they're creative.
Yeah. Well, and I think, even people that if you look at people that are really highly creative, and you start kind of paying attention to what they do, they actually have a process that they've developed. And the process that I teach is based on how we naturally solve problems as humans. And the book is also based on the research I did through my PhD, where I was able to identify three critical areas that teams need to, be competent in order to be creative together. In fact, there'll be a section of the book about the brainstorming research and when it works, when it doesn't, what are the parameters to make brainstorming work.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because you can't make it work doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely.
So I'm looking forward to that. And that will go into my collection of different books on creativity because again, I'm a geek on that stuff.
Well,
And
thanks.
don't feel bad about how long this book is taking you. My friend Craig McNeil Wilson is working on a trilogy that I think he started in 2000,
Oh, wow.
and he's got one done. For the past, 5 years, he's been saying, I'm almost done with the second. And I keep on seeing posts, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, but he's still working on it. So man, you're Speedy Gonzalez when it comes to that.
Well,
So
good
it's
for
working
him for
for you.
sticking
Yeah.
with it for almost
Yeah.
25 years. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, mine's
He's just
definitely
a
a,
wonderful guy. So
yeah, writing is a, well, I shouldn't say it's a slow process. It kind of ebbs and flows, right? Like some days are really fast, some days are slower, but
yeah.
yeah, it's great. I'm excited that it should be out. I've got a publisher and the publication date is January 2025. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm able to meet that, but
Well, and I think that's wise because like I put out a couple of books and I've helped people put out books and they just don't get why there's such a lead time.
yeah,
And when you're working with a publisher, it's even more. If you start a book with a publisher, count on at least 12 to 16 months before you see anything. And I've
exactly.
got other people that are self-publishing, and that's yeah, you could turn in what you got to a printer and they'll print it, but then you've got all the lead up to actually getting it out there.
Mhm.
So, and I think we talked a little bit about editors. I had a horrible experience with my second book, but every book I've worked with an editor on has been spectacular.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think it's key. It's so key. In fact, oh my gosh, if anyone is listening and thinking of writing the book, please do not write a book without someone else editing it. I had this situation during the pandemic where I met this woman online and we like were both on a panel together and she wrote a book and I really just wanted to support her. The topic wasn't really my thing, but I really wanted to support her. I bought the book and I started reading it and literally on the first page there were 7 typos. And it kept going. I couldn't even finish it. I couldn't even read past the first chapter. There were so many typos and errors that
Yeah.
I honestly threw it away.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, and here's the thing, like you look into second and third editions of books that are put out by really great publishers, you'll still find typos.
Well, and like, yeah, a couple here and there is super normal,
Right,
but
exactly.
7 in one
Yeah.
paragraph is
No, no. And that shows that yeah. And the resistance is, well, they won't understand what I'm trying to do. Well, guess what? If you want to sell it beyond your family, other people are going to have to understand what you're trying to do on how you communicate it.
yeah.
That's just, I'm so glad that you're putting it out there. And
Well,
please let me know how I can help and support whatever you're doing if there's anything.
I appreciate that. And anyone who's listening who wants to write a book, I highly recommend reading the book Write a Must Read by AJ Harper. It
Yeah.
just came out last year in 2020, no,
Yeah.
2022, sorry. And excellent book. I ended up
Yeah.
working with her. She's coaching me and
What is
just
it called again?
Write a Must Read
Mm,
by AJ Harper. Excellent.
yeah.
She's a ghostwriter. I think she's written like 100 books. And
Okay.
so she's,
Yeah. My favorite is Anne Lamont's Bird by Bird.
yeah, yeah. And is
That's
also another excellent,
yeah.
excellent book.
Yeah. So, all
These
right.
two would complement each other well,
Oh,
though.
really? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Want to get into a lightning round and whatever top of mind, you're not signing a contract that this is your thought for the rest of your life, just right now.
Got
First
it.
one is, and I think this might be it, but I want to check. What is your favorite book or any media that you like to give as a gift?
Mm. Oh, I've given that book I just mentioned.
Uh-huh.
Actually, no, I've given that a couple times. There's another book that I am blanking that I've given as a gift many times. Um, okay, I'm blanking on that, but I can tell you the most recent book I gave as a
That
gift.
works
How
too.
about that?
Yeah.
Just last week, I sent this to one of my coaching clients. It's called The Pivot Year. And I think the author's name is Brianna Wiest or West. And it's really well written. A friend actually gifted it to me. And every day is you read one page of the book and
Uh-huh.
but it feels like so much deeper and more meaningful than like some of the affirmation books or some of the stuff I feel like is very regurgitated. And this
Right.
feels really fresh and new. So highly recommend it. It's called The
Great.
Pivot
Great.
Year.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, I used to ask this question of who are your heroes, but what I found more often now is people can't point to a person. So what I want you to do is construct your hero from the top 3 or 4 people. Who are they and what parts would you use to assemble your hero?
Ooh, I love this twist here. Um, I think that my hero is, a combination of several people. One aspect is they think deeply and they're thoughtful. A little bit of what we were talking about earlier, they're not just jumping to the quick answer, but they're willing to like dig in, and also they're willing to change their mind. I think that's key with like really understanding something like, oh, I used to think this way, but now I think this way because I learned blah, blah, blah. That I think a lot of empathy and compassion and a good listener, and willing to be a bit of a rebel or a bit rogue, and go against the grain a bit. Yeah, I'll
Okay,
pause there. Those are some good
good.
traits.
Would your first thing that I thought of was your mom, uh,
Mm,
about somebody who set the table for you. But I
yeah.
don't want to speak for your hero, so
Well, yeah,
she's
my
my
mom,
hero.
she's your hero. Yeah, I think especially, younger or earlier in my life when she was younger, she was pushing the system quite a bit. She was at the time when I was growing up, she owned a real estate school, and she was the only female who owned a real estate school in the state of Florida. And she dealt with a lot of challenges because of that, but she pushed through and it was really cool to see.
Okay, since you brought it up, I'll ask this as an auxiliary question I have. What have you rethought recently? What have you changed your mind about, and made you think differently?
Oh boy. One of the things that I've experienced in the last several years is in 2019, my wife and I became foster parents to an 18-year-old. And then 2 years later, when she was 20, we adopted her. And it's been amazing and super difficult, especially those first couple of years. And it's so cool. She's actually doing really well. But I have learned so much about um, parenting. Of course, is the only kid I have. Didn't have any kids before this. And but also like coaching and mentoring. And she is like the poster child for positive feedback and positive encouragement. And I don't know if you've heard the premise that, you have to give, 7 positive comments to counteract 1 negative comment. And I mean, she fits that to the T. And I don't know if I'd ever been in a situation before where I like bumped up against that so much. And it's fascinating to watch. Like when she gets positive feedback, she just like blossoms and she goes towards that. And I am sometimes my default, which is not the best default, is like more towards advice giving. And it's just been a great model for me of like, yeah, it doesn't really work. You have to really focus more on the coaching, the encouragement, that kind of thing.
And I
So it's
think the
been,
closer you are to somebody, the less they believe the positive that you say. Sometimes
well,
it's
she
like,
believes it.
but it takes a bunch of reinforcement for it to counteract anything other than we're more likely to
I see what
believe
you're
the
saying.
negative things than the positive. At least this my experience with myself, and then
Yep.
especially with a lot of people I've worked with a long time.
Hmm.
It comes out clearer when I, even unintended, if I give advice, it comes across as negative versus just listening and empathizing with them.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
I'm yet there. I've got a 10-year-old son, so I know it's coming. And and having worked with
Start
youth for a
now.
long working with youth for a long, long time, I thought I knew kids and I thought I knew adolescents. It's a whole different world when they're yours.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah. So wow, thank you. One more, just last one.
Okay.
And real quick, who do you find yourself quoting most? Movie, author,
Um,
leader, whatever. What's your favorite go-to quote?
I definitely don't quote movies like almost ever. I almost never watch a movie more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would probably have to be, I mean, there's some researchers for sure. I have a definition of teams that I use over and over that comes from the book The Wisdom of Teams by
Mm-hmm.
Katzenbach and Smith. So I use that a lot.
What is
Um,
it? What is it? Go with
oh,
it.
I was
You
gonna
can
say you're gonna want me to say it.
paraphrase, paraphrase. We're not looking for
All
word
right, let's
perfect.
see. Teams uh a team is a small group of people with a common focus, common approach, with, oh, I'm not gonna get this right. Basically, like shared performance goals, a shared approach, and they have a shared accountability.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we use the word team when we don't actually mean team. We're really talking more about a group of people that are
Right.
maybe supporting each other, but they don't have a shared accountability or a
Right.
shared vision.
Yeah. And
So,
it's about the proximity. So
uh,
if we're in the same elevator, we're not a team, we're a group.
oh yes, gotcha. Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah. Well, Amy, thank you so much for visiting with me today. I knew it was an honor when I met you in person at AEE, but I've enjoyed our interactions since then. And I'm looking forward to when your book's coming out. Keep me informed and I'll make sure that I promote it as well. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, John. I really enjoyed it. It was a fun conversation, and
Yeah.
thanks for having me on the show.
Be present and kind as you do great things.